Hi, my name is Olivia DePauli, and today I will be analyzing a synthesis essay in which I wrote in my AP Language course. The essay had to do with eminent domain, which is the power governments have to acquire property from private owners for public use. Synthesize a well-developed essay that defends, challenges, or qualifies the notion that eminent domain is productive and beneficial. It also states use at least 3 sources. Very, very important. You must use 3 sources and no more than 4. It also says the suggested reading time is 55 minutes. So you take about 15 minutes to analyze, annotate, and read your sources, and then 40 minutes to develop 5 paragraphs. So I'm just going to dive right in. Okay, so I think if you can, it'd be really nice to try to include some type of banging introduction, that grabs the reader's attention. I'm not too impressed with my work here. I kind of just talked about eminent domain. So I said the belief that government and business should work together is a beautiful one. However, adding the private sector into that equation oftentimes complicates things. Federal corporate partnerships question the productivity of eminent design. So I goofed up and I said design instead of domain. That is so easily fixable if you pay attention to detail and proofread just for a second. I know it's hard because you will not have a lot of time, but if you can just proofread, leave like a couple minutes, if anything, and just look over, it will do wonders, because I used design instead of domain all throughout my essay, and I'm sure if this was on the AP test, they would have docked me so hard. So moral of the story is just try to pay attention to a detail and proofread if you can. And then I just said, my thesis statement was, however, with the correct motivation mixed with the right governance, eminent design is prominently beneficial. So I think number 1 is that you have a very clear and concise thesis statement in your synthesis essay, as well as in any essay you write. You need a very, very clear thesis statement. Take stance one side or the other. Just make sure you are showing, your opinions, and that it's very clear. So obviously I'm for eminent domain, not design. And my thesis statement kind of sets me up for a counterclaim. You can include a counterclaim. You don't have to. In my case, I did. Okay, so for my first paragraph, I started off by saying eminent domain has a long history among the past in the United States, notably in instances such as United States v. Gettysburg Electric Railroad Company, where Congress fought for the protection and acquisition of the site of the Gettysburg battlefield in Pennsylvania. I am not very impressed with my topic sentence. I think it would have been better if I said eminent domain has played a vital role in history. But I just kind of said eminent domain has had a role in history, and that really doesn't tell the reader one way or another what I'm trying to prove, so I should have said a vital role in history. The rest of my paragraph mostly just summarizes, eminent domain's role throughout history, and that it has helped with the preservation of historic sites, setting aside a space for future generations to reflect upon, works to protect beloved American parks. I used source A. Another very, very key component to a synthesis essay is that you are quoting and sourcing correctly. That is very, very imperative. Make sure that you're using quotations and that you're putting source A, B, C, D, etc. At the end, and that you're putting the period after the parentheses. So we have thesis is very important, sourcing is very important. Okay, so my first paragraph mostly just talks about the role of eminent domain throughout history. And then my second body paragraph, I said eminent design has also been utilized to facilitate in citizens' everyday lives, being utilized to facilitate. So right off the bat, it's a mess. I'm repeating what I said. I tried to use bigger words, but I just sound foolish because I'm, kind of all over the place repeating what I said and such. So again, if I would have proofread and if I would have slowed down a little bit, I probably would have caught that, and I probably would have gone back and rephrased and reworded what I put down, but I didn't. Okay, so then I use source A again, and then I just continued to give examples. In the 1880s, the neighborhood in Greensville was steadily declining. However, today Greensville is thriving with so many new affordable homes, neighborhood streets, water. Just again reiterating that eminent domain has played a very key role in developing society. And then I used source D, so I sourced that correctly. I paraphrased, so no matter if you're paraphrasing or quoting, you need to include the sourcing. And then for each quote, it is really important that you don't just state it, you have to explain it, put it into your words, make it clear to the reader how you're interpreting it. And then I did it with saying the fire for eminent domain stays lit as it inevitably works to benefit the lives of all its inhabitants. I think another thing really important to writing any essay on the AP exam is that you're trying to include some type of eloquent speech. Obviously, that was not eloquent at all, but I think if you can use big fancy words, that will impress the AP graders. So, study those vocab lists. They really, really do come in handy when writing your essays. Okay. And so then my third body paragraph, I said that cities that make use of eminent design again, I said design. So, to promote private development projects often end up enhancing economies rather than undermining them as businesses are brought in making way for various job development. Now, that was okay. I think it was a little longer than I would have liked. It's not too concise. I think, keeping it a little more succinct and a little more straight to the point is better than trying to throw in all this jibber jabber, whatever. It wasn't that bad, but I think I could have made it a little more brief and, so on. And then I went on to give a counterclaim. I said, however, eminent domain in the hands of aggressive policymakers can sometimes cause more damage than good, as a motivation for profit can be a consuming one. Although eminent domain may be a threat to the public in some aspects, the taking of private property for public use is of justification if backed up by reasonable compensation. So basically, I just justified that, eminent domain is okay if those taken from are compensated. So I was just, classically refuting counterclaim. And then I quoted source B, so I used source A, B, and D, so I've checked all those 3 boxes. You must have your 3 sources. That is vital. If you do not have 3 sources, you're immediately, docked points, for sure. Okay, so I guess in that paragraph, something I could have worked on is making sure that my topic sentence is a little more concise and straight to the point. And then I finished off by saying, so long as citizens are rightfully compensated, eminent design yields nothing but benefits. So, again, proofreading is a problem that I endured throughout this essay. Okay, and then my conclusion, I said, eminent domain is prominently beneficial mixed with the correct motives, substantial governments, and protection of the private and public sector. So essentially, I just restated my thesis, you know how that is, you just restate the thesis, and then I said, eminent design protects history and makes way for the future by preserving the environment and providing for the public by creating jobs and protecting simple rights such as adequate water supplies and imperative forms of transportation. And then I said eminent design is the design of the past, present, and future. So if it was eminent design, I would have had a nice little clincher, but it's eminent domain, so I just look silly. But okay, so just to go over I think the key components to writing a synthesis essay. You want to have a very clear thesis statement. You want to make sure that the stance you're taking is out there and that there's no confusion. If you have a strong thesis statement, that sets you up for the rest of your essay. And then also in the thesis statement, you don't want to go ahead and go ahead of yourself and, list what you're going to say. Leave a little, you know, leave a little for wonder, and so the reader doesn't already know what you're going to write about. Just kind of take your side and then explain it throughout the essay, but you don't need to list what you're going to write about in the introduction paragraph. So a strong thesis statement, make sure you're using 3 different sources, no more than 4, and that you're sourcing correctly. Sourcing is a huge part of synthesis essays. It's not very hard. Just make sure you're using your quotations and that you're stating source A, B, C, etc., period, after the parentheses. And then make sure you're explaining your quotes and that you're not just throwing them in there and not backing them up with your own reasonings. And then you want to show off your writing skills and vocabulary. I think having a vast understanding of vocabulary comes in very handy when writing these essays. I think also another thing, while reading your sources, you're given about 6. I don't know if it's the same every single time, but, go through them and underline them. You don't have to read them very, very thoroughly, but I think as long as you're jotting down notes, stating for or against, trying to organize your ideas within the 15 minutes you have. And then I think in some cases, or in most cases, they'll include a couple somewhat extraneous, sources that you really don't need to read through. So do not feel as if you must read through every single source, because if you have a sufficient amount of information from 2 or 3 sources, then you're fine. You have your ideas put together, just write the essay, because you will be crunching to get that essay done. In my case, I think it was really, really detrimental for me to not have proofread, because I used, obviously eminent design all throughout my essay. However, I would say that I used a good amount of evidence and examples, and that my ideas were pretty clearly developed throughout the essay, and that, I definitely had some flaws for sure, but there were some good things as well. I think that I also need to work on, topic sentences, making sure your topic sentences are clear and concise, and that they're straight to the point, and that your reader doesn't have to read through the whole paragraph to understand, what the point you're trying to get across. Surprisingly, my teacher gave me a 7 on this. I think that might have been a little bit high. I think that was probably a 5 or a 6, just considering how often I said eminent design. So that is just a very good example of what happens when you rush and when you do not give any time to proofread or anything of that kind. But that's what you learn from practicing these essays. All throughout this year, I learned every single time I learned something new, and especially from this, I learned, you must give at least a minute or two. Try to give yourself a minute or two to proofread. I think that's really, really important. If I'm being honest, on the AP test, I felt as if there was a good amount of time to write my essays. I was left with a lot more time, and it might have just been that I was wildly prepared, but also I don't know. I think that the time we had was a good match for the prompts we were given, and so no matter how defeated and done you may be with your essays, if you have time, reread your essays and try to go through them and fix what you can. Also, I guess maybe talking about multiple choice and such, knowing vocabulary really, really helps. Um, the reading was basically the SAT on vocab steroids. It was very, very vocab heavy. So I think an overall vast understanding of vocabulary is very, very important and beneficial as well. You might get annoyed with how much vocab is given throughout the year, but that is such a big part of the AP Lang test. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that until I got to the test, and I realized how nice it was to have a good grasp of vocabulary. Um, so that pretty much sums up my analysis of my synthesis essay writing. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this helps somewhat. And see you next time. Bye.